The morning started like any other, except it didn't feel like it. I opened my eyes slowly, my head heavy as if I'd been hit with a brick. The sunlight streaming through the blinds felt too bright, too harsh. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I sat up in bed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. My mouth was dry, my head slightly pounding. Had I been drinking? The memory was fuzzy. And then I saw it. A dress. Not just any dress, but Jennifer's favorite red dress. The one she wore on special occasions when she wanted to turn heads. It was crumpled in my hand, the silky fabric twisted around my fingers like I'd been clutching it in my sleep. What the hell? I muttered, staring at it like it was a foreign object. Jennifer wasn't in bed. Her side was pristine, the duvet perfectly smoothed as if she hadn't even touched it last night. I glanced at the dress again, trying to piece together the puzzle. Why did I have her dress in my hand? The more I tried to remember, the less made sense. I'd been out last night, drinks with co-workers at the Copper Pint. I remember a few laughs, a few too many beers. But after that, nothing. My phone was on the nightstand, and I grabbed it scrolling through my call log and messages. No missed calls, no texts, no sign that Jennifer had tried to reach me. I walked through the house, calling her name. Jennifer? You here? No answer. The house was silent. Eerily so. In the kitchen, the coffee maker sat unused. Jennifer was religious about her morning coffee. She never skipped it. I stood there for a moment, gripping the counter as unease settled in my chest. The dress felt like an accusation, but I didn't know what it was accusing me or her of. I spent the rest of the morning trying to fill in the gaps. Had Jennifer come home last night? Did we have a fight? Had she left angry? I searched for clues, combing through the house for anything that might explain why her dress was in my hand. Her car keys were gone, and so was her handbag, but everything else seemed untouched. By the time noon rolled around, I was no closer to understanding what had happened. The dress lay on the bed like a silent witness, its crimson fabric mocking me. I sat on the edge of the mattress, running my hands through my hair. "Where are you, Jennifer?" I whispered. The day stretched on, my frustration growing with each passing hour. When Jennifer finally walked through the door that evening, her expression was calm, almost cheerful. "Hey," she said, dropping her bag on the couch. "Hey," I replied, watching her carefully. "Sorry I didn't text." "Work ran late," she said, moving into the kitchen. Her tone was casual, breezy, as if nothing was wrong. But something was. I just didn't know it yet. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Jennifer move around like it was any other evening. She pulled a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge, took a sip, and leaned against the counter. "You okay?" she asked, catching me staring. I snapped out of it, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just a long day." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Tell me about it." But I didn't want to tell her about it. I didn't want to talk about work, or how my morning had started with her dress in my hand, and no explanation. Instead, I studied her. She looked composed, her makeup subtle but perfect, her blouse wrinkle-free. There wasn't a trace of guilt or nervousness, at least none that I could see. "Where were you last night?" I asked casually, leaning against the doorway. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, so brief I might have missed it if I wasn't watching her so closely. "I told you, work ran late," she said, setting her glass on the counter. "I ended up crashing at Maya's place. I didn't want to wake you." Maya, her coworker. The name fit easily into the narrative she was spinning, but something about it didn't sit right. The next day, I called Maya on the pretense of following up on something Jennifer had mentioned. "Hey, Maya," I said, keeping my tone light. "Jennifer said she crashed at your place the other night. Everything okay?" There was a pause, and then Maya laughed awkwardly. "No, I haven't seen Jen outside of work all week." I thanked her and hung up, my stomach nodding. Jennifer had lied. That evening, as Jennifer sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I watched her from the kitchen. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Why had she lied? Was it something innocent, a late-night drink with friends, maybe? Or was it something worse? The dress flashed in my mind again, its silky fabric of vivid red against the white sheets. What kind of night ended with her dress crumpled in my hand and her nowhere to be found? I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I played the part of the oblivious husband, smiling and nodding as she talked about work and her upcoming projects. But inside, my thoughts churned. "Where were you, Jennifer?" I thought. And who were you with? I couldn't stop replaying my conversation with Maya. Her laughter, the awkward pause before she answered. It was like a bucket of ice water over my suspicions. Jennifer had lied about staying at Maya's house, and she hadn't even hesitated while telling the lie. I needed advice. Someone who could tell me if I was spiraling, if I was overthinking. Chris was my best friend. He'd been my sounding board since college, the guy I trusted most outside of Jennifer. If anyone could help me untangle this mess, it was him. We met at the Copper Pint, the same bar where I'd lost pieces of that fateful night. Chris was already seated at a booth in the corner, nursing a beer. "You look like crap," he said as I slid into the seat across from him. "Thanks," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "Nice to see you too." He raised his hands in mock surrender. All right. What's going on?" "You sounded intense on the phone." I hesitated, glancing around the bar. The low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses felt like background noise to the storm in my head. "It's Jennifer," I said finally. Chris's brow furrowed. "What about her?" I told him everything. The dress, the missing night, the lie about staying at Maya's. As I spoke, his expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Damn," he said when I finished. "That's a lot. Do you think I'm overreacting?" I asked, desperate for an anchor in the chaos. Chris took a long sip of his beer, clearly weighing his words. "Look, man, I've known Jen for years. She's always seemed solid. But what?" I pressed. He sighed. "If your gut's telling you something's off, maybe it is. People don't lie for no reason, Mark. There's something going on, even if it's not what you think." His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been hoping he'd tell me I was crazy, that Jennifer's behavior was innocent. But instead, he was validating the doubt that had been eating at me. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice quieter. Chris leaned forward, his expression serious. "Keep your eyes open. Don't jump to conclusions, but don't ignore the signs either. And if it keeps getting worse..." He hesitated, then shrugged. "You might need to get someone else involved. Someone who can find out what you can't." "A pie?" I asked, the thought making my stomach churn. He nodded. "Yeah, I know it feels wrong, but sometimes it's the only way to get the truth." We left the bar an hour later, the conversation replaying in my mind as I drove home. Chris was right. I needed to be careful, to keep my emotions in check. But the idea of hiring someone to dig into Jennifer's life made me feel sick. I loved her. I didn't want to believe she was capable of betraying me. What if she was lying? When I got home, Jennifer was already in bed, her phone charging on the nightstand. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. She looked peaceful, her face soft in the glow of the bedside lamp. Was this the woman I'd married? Or had I been blind to who she really was? I climbed into bed, the weight of doubt heavier than ever. "Keep your eyes open," Chris had said. And so I would. The next morning, Jennifer was up early, moving through the house with her usual efficiency. She smiled at me over her coffee, the same warm smile I'd fallen for years ago. For a moment, I wondered if I was imagining it all. Maybe the lie about Maya was innocent. Maybe the dress was just a misunderstanding. But as she kissed me goodbye and walked out the door, my doubts returned, heavier than before. If everything was fine, why did it feel like I was living with a stranger? I decided to trust Chris's advice and watch for signs. Jennifer's phone was my first focus, but it was always locked, and she rarely left it unattended. Still, her behavior was what stood out. She started coming home later than usual, with vague explanations about meetings or running errands. She spent more time on her phone, laughing at messages she never shared. One night, as she showered, I finally worked up the nerve to check her location history on the shared family app. My heart skipped a beat. There it was, a pin drop at a coffee shop across town, marked from the night I'd found the dress. The name of the place was the Roasted Bean. I'd never heard of it, and Jennifer had never mentioned it. My mind raced. Why was she there? Who was she meeting? The only way to find out was to see for myself. The next day, I parked across the street from the Roasted Bean, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I watched the entrance. It was a cozy-looking place with a few tables outside, the kind of spot Jennifer would like. I felt like an idiot sitting there like some amateur detective. But the image of her dress, crumpled in my hand, pushed me forward. For an hour, I watched people come and go, but Jennifer never showed. I considered going inside, maybe asking if anyone remembered seeing her, but the idea seemed ridiculous. What was I supposed to say? "Hi, Has my wife been here with someone she shouldn't be? As I drove home, my frustration simmered. The coffee shop had given me nothing, just another piece of the puzzle with no clear connection. When Jennifer came home that evening, she looked radiant, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. She kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day was. It was fine, I said, studying her carefully. What about you? Busy, she said breezily, kicking off her heels. Meetings all afternoon. I wanted to ask if those meetings had been at the Roasted Bean. Instead, I nodded, swallowing my suspicions. That night, as Jennifer slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I was no closer to the truth than I'd been a week ago, but I couldn't let it go. If Jennifer was lying, there had to be a reason, and I was going to find it. Days passed, but the knot in my chest only tightened. I tried to act normal, to carry on as if everything was fine, but inside, I was unraveling. The dress, the coffee shop, the lie. Each piece added weight to the growing suspicion I couldn't shake. Jennifer, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease. She laughed easily, kissed me on her way out the door, and talked about her workday over dinner like nothing was amiss. It was maddening. One night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I found myself studying her again. Her smile, her posture, the way she absent-mindedly scrolled through her phone, it was all so familiar, yet suddenly felt foreign. "Mark," she said, pulling me out of my thoughts. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" My pulse quickened. Did she suspect something? Was she testing me? "Just work stuff," I lied. She nodded, her brow furrowing slightly. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, right?" Her words hung in the air, almost mocking me. If only she knew how wrong everything was. That night, after Jennifer fell asleep, I slipped out of bed and walked downstairs. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. I sank onto the couch, burying my head in my hands. "What are you doing, Mark?" I muttered to myself. Part of me wanted to confront Jennifer, to demand the truth, and put an end to the torture. But another part of me, the louder, more fearful part, hesitated. What if the truth was worse than I imagined? By the next morning, my frustration had turned into resolve. I couldn't keep living like this, doubting every word, questioning every move. If Jennifer wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd have to find it myself. I grabbed my phone and texted Chris. "Mark, you still have that PI's number?" "Chris, yeah. You sure about this?" "Mark, I don't have a choice." That evening, after Jennifer left for a late meeting, I called the number Chris had sent me. The man who answered introduced himself as Alan, his voice calm and professional. "How can I help you, Mr. Reynolds?" he asked. I hesitated, the weight of what I was about to do settling over me. "I think my wife is hiding something," I said finally. "I need to know what it is." We met the next day at a quiet diner on the edge of town. Alan was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and an air of quiet confidence. He asked me a series of questions, taking careful notes as I explained everything. The dress, the coffee shop, the lie about Maya. "Do you have a sense of who she might be meeting?" Alan asked. I shook my head. "No idea. But whoever it is, it's enough for her to lie to me." Alan nodded, closing his notebook. "I'll start tracking her movements. Discreetly. If there's something to find, I'll find it." As I drove home from the meeting, a wave of guilt washed over me. Hiring a private investigator to follow Jennifer felt like a betrayal of my own, a violation of the trust we'd built over years of marriage. But then I thought about the dress, crumpled in my hand like a scarlet flag. If she wasn't being honest, she had no one to blame but herself. I spent the next few days in a state of quiet turmoil, waiting for Alan to call. The house felt emptier, every interaction with Jennifer laced with tension I couldn't shake. She seemed oblivious, moving through her routine with the same practiced ease, but her calm only made me more suspicious. Was she always this good at hiding things? One evening, Chris called while Jennifer was upstairs showering. "How's it going?" he asked, skipping pleasantries. "Nothing yet," I said, lowering my voice. Alan's still tracking her. Chris sighed. "Look, man, I know this is hard, but you're doing the right thing. You need to know the truth, no matter what it is." "What if it's worse than I think?" I asked quietly. "Then you deal with it," Chris said firmly. "Whatever it is, you'll get through it. You're stronger than you think." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. His words helped, but only a little. Alan's call came 3 days later, and his tone immediately told me he'd found something. I've been following her movements like you asked, he said. She's been sticking to her usual routine most of the time. Work, errands, the occasional lunch with friends. But yesterday, she went somewhere unusual. My chest tightened. Where? A hotel downtown, Alan said. She spent 2 hours there. Alone. Alone, I repeated, gripping the phone tighter. As far as I could tell, she didn't meet anyone in the lobby, and no one followed her in. But I'll admit, it's unusual behavior. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of this new piece of information. Why would Jennifer go to a hotel alone? Did you see her leave? I asked. Yes, Alan said. She left as casually as she arrived. No signs of distress or urgency. It didn't add up. If she wasn't meeting someone, what was she doing there? That evening, Jennifer came home with her usual smile, kissing me on the cheek before setting her bag down. How was your day? She asked, her voice light. Same old, I said, forcing a smile. Yours? Busy, she replied, moving into the kitchen. Meetings all afternoon. Her lies stung, even though I'd expected it. I studied her carefully as she poured herself a glass of wine, her movements fluid and unbothered. She didn't seem like a woman with secrets. But I knew better now. Alan called again the next day with another update. She went back to the same coffee shop today, he said. This time, she met with someone. My heart skipped a beat. Who? A man, Alan replied. Mid-40s, professional looking. They talked for about an hour. I couldn't hear what they said, but it seemed friendly. Friendly, I repeated, the word tasting bitter. Yes, no signs of intimacy or anything overtly suspicious, but they were definitely familiar with each other. I hung up, my mind swirling with questions. Who was this man? And why was Jennifer meeting him? This wasn't just about the dress anymore. This was about the cracks in our life I hadn't noticed until now. Whatever she was hiding, I was going to find it. The knowledge that Jennifer was meeting someone familiar enough to warrant a private rendezvous, sat like a lead weight in my chest. Every time I looked at her, I felt like I was seeing a stranger. That evening, as she sat across the dinner table, smiling and chatting about her day, I couldn't help but wonder, who was she really? Everything okay? She asked, her fork paused midair. Yeah, I replied, forcing a smile. Just tired. The lie came easily. I've been lying a lot lately, matching her step for step. Alan's updates became my lifeline, each one pulling me deeper into the labyrinth of Jennifer's deception. He followed her movements meticulously, providing me with a timeline of her day. Meetings, errands, the occasional coffee shop visit. She went back to the coffee shop again today, Alan said during one of our calls. Same man. They talked for about 30 minutes this time. Did you get anything on him? I asked, my voice tight. I'm working on it, he replied. So far, he's clean. Could be a colleague, a client, or something else. The ambiguity gnawed at me. Was this man the reason for her lies? The reason for the dress and the hotel? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. 2 days later, Alan sent me a photo. It was grainy, taken through the window of the coffee shop, but the image was clear enough. Jennifer sitting across from a man in a navy suit, her face animated as she gestured with her hands. I studied the photo for what felt like hours. The man's face was unfamiliar, but something about the way they interacted felt personal. They weren't touching, but there was an intimacy in their body language, a closeness that made my stomach churn. That evening, Jennifer came home later than usual. She breezed through the door with her usual smile, kicking off her heels and dropping her bag on the couch. Long day? I asked, keeping my tone casual. You have no idea, she said, stretching her arms above her head. I've been running around all afternoon. I nodded, swallowing the anger bubbling beneath the surface. She was lying again, and I knew it. After dinner, I waited until Jennifer was in the shower before I pulled out my phone and called Alan. Keep following her, I said, my voice low. I need to know who this guy is. I'm on it, Alan replied. As I hung up, I leaned against the counter, my hands shaking. The lies were piling up, each one heavier than the last, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could carry them. The next morning, the weight of everything came crashing down on me. The lies, the surveillance, the unanswered questions. I felt like I was sinking in quicksand, each step pulling me deeper into a pit I didn't know how to escape. Jennifer moved through the house like nothing was wrong. She hummed softly as she brewed her morning coffee, her expression relaxed, even cheerful. I watched her from the kitchen doorway, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and guilt. What if I was wrong? The thought hit me like a slap. What if there was an innocent explanation for everything? The dress, the coffee shop, even the hotel. What if I'd misread it all? Jennifer had never given me a reason to doubt her before. She was smart, driven, and fiercely loyal. At least, I thought she was. But now, every interaction felt like a test, every word loaded with hidden meaning. She turned, catching me staring. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yeah," I said quickly, averting my gaze. "You've been quiet lately," she said, walking over and leaning against the counter. "Something on your mind?" I hesitated, the urge to confront her bubbling just beneath the surface. But I couldn't do it. "Not yet. Just work stuff," I lied, forcing a smile. She studied me for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. Then she nodded, brushing a hand over my arm. "Don't work too hard," she said, her voice soft. The gesture was so normal, so familiar, that it made my chest ache. Later that day, Alan called with another update. "She met with the same guy again," he said. "This time at a park downtown." My stomach churned. "What were they doing?" "Talking," Alan replied. "That's it." They sat on a bench for about 45 minutes, and then they went their separate ways. The simplicity of it made my frustration boil over. "Did you get his name?" I demanded. "Not yet, but I'm close," Alan said. "Give me another day or two." That evening, as Jennifer and I sat on the couch watching a movie, the guilt came crashing down again. She looked so at ease, her head resting against my shoulder as she laughed at something on the screen. I wanted to believe this was real, that the woman sitting beside me wasn't capable of the betrayal I feared. But the doubts wouldn't go away. After the movie ended, Jennifer turned to me, her eyes soft. "I feel like we haven't had much time together lately," she said. "Maybe we should do something this weekend. Just the two of us." The suggestion caught me off guard. Was this an olive branch? A sign that things were normal? Or just another distraction? "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "That sounds good." She leaned in and kissed me, her lips warm and familiar. For a moment, I let myself forget everything: Alan, the dress, the man in the coffee shop. But as she pulled away and headed upstairs, the weight of the truth settled back over me like a suffocating blanket. The days leading up to the weekend felt like an eternity. I couldn't shake the sense that Jennifer's suggestion for a getaway was calculated, a way to distract me from whatever she was hiding. Still, I agreed to it. Maybe being away from everything would give me a chance to figure out what was really going on. The night before we were supposed to leave, Jennifer came home late again. I was sitting at the dining table, absently scrolling through my phone, when I heard the front door creak open. "Hey," she said softly, setting her bag on the counter. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. She hesitated for a moment, then walked over and sat across from me. Her expression was serious, her usual ease replaced by something I couldn't quite place. "Mark," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something I need to tell you." My heart stopped. "Okay," I said, keeping my face carefully blank. She took a deep breath, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "I've been feeling off lately. Stressed. I don't know how to explain it, but it feels like something's missing." "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat tightening. "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I love you, Mark. I do. But I feel like I've lost a part of myself somewhere along the way, and I don't know how to get it back." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Was this her way of admitting to something? A prelude to telling me about the man she'd been meeting? I leaned forward, my pulse racing. "Is there someone else?" Jennifer's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment I thought she might deny it. But then she shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "It's not about anyone else. It's about me. I've been so focused on work, on everything else, that I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that her tears, her trembling voice, were genuine. But the image of her sitting across from that man at the coffee shop flashed in my mind, and doubt clouded everything. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" I asked, my voice tight. "I didn't know how," she admitted. "I didn't want to worry you, or make you think it was your fault." The conversation left me more confused than ever. If Jennifer wasn't lying about her feelings, what was she doing at the coffee shop? At the hotel? Who was the man she'd been meeting? And why did it feel like her confession was missing something? Later that night, after Jennifer had fallen asleep, I texted Alan. Mark, any updates on the guy? Alan, still digging. I'll have more soon. I stared at the screen, my frustration mounting. The truth felt so close, yet just out of reach. The next morning, as Jennifer and I packed for the trip, she seemed lighter, more at ease. She hummed softly as she folded clothes into her suitcase, her smile unguarded. I think this weekend is exactly what we need, she said, glancing at me. Yeah, I replied, forcing a smile. But inside, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to crumble beneath me. The weekend getaway turned out to be more awkward than relaxing. Jennifer seemed genuinely happy, her laughter coming easily as we wandered through quaint shops and shared meals at cozy restaurants. But for me, every moment was tainted by the shadow of suspicion. Every time she smiled, I wondered if it was real. Every time she held my hand, I wondered if she'd done the same with the man at the coffee shop. It felt like I was living in two worlds. One where I was the loving husband on a romantic weekend, and another where I was a man unraveling the lies that had invaded his marriage. When we returned home, Jennifer kissed me softly and headed upstairs to unpack. I lingered in the living room, my mind racing. I hadn't heard from Alan all weekend, but his silence only made me more anxious. I pulled out my phone and called him, pacing the room as the phone rang. Mark, Alan said, picking up on the second ring. I was just about to call you. What's going on? I asked, my voice sharp. I finally got a name, he said. The man she's been meeting is Dr. Ethan Hart. The words hit me like a slap. Dr. Hart? I repeated, disbelief thick in my voice. Yeah, Alan said. Does the name mean anything to you? I sank onto the couch, my mind spinning. Dr. Hart wasn't just some stranger. He was my doctor, my trusted physician of nearly a decade. What the hell is going on? I muttered, more to myself than to Alan. That's what I'm trying to figure out, Alan replied. The meetings don't seem romantic, at least not from what I've seen, but it's clear they know each other well. The revelation left me reeling. Dr. Hart had always been professional, kind, the sort of person you'd trust implicitly. Why would Jennifer be meeting him in secret? I need more, I said, my voice tight. Follow him. Find out what he's up to. You got it, Alan said. That night, as Jennifer and I sat on the couch, the weight of the revelation pressed down on me like a boulder. How are you feeling? She asked, her voice soft. Fine, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. She frowned, leaning closer. Are you sure? You've seemed distant lately. Ai fine, I repeated, forcing a smile. Her concern felt genuine, but it only deepened the knot in my chest. How could she sit here, acting like everything was normal, while keeping secrets with someone I trusted? Later, after Jennifer had gone to bed, I sat in the darkened living room, staring at the family photos on the wall. How long had this been going on? Was I just another patient to Hart? Or had I unknowingly shared my life with a man who'd been scheming behind my back? The questions kept me up all night. The next day, Alan called with another update. I followed Dr. Hart after his last meeting with Jennifer, he said. He went straight to his office. Nothing unusual there, but something feels off. What do you mean? I asked. I ran a deeper background check on him, Alan said. He's clean, no criminal record, no financial red flags. But he's been withdrawing large sums of cash recently. Thousands at a time. My stomach churned. Why? That's what I'm trying to find out, Alan said. The revelation added another layer of complexity to the mystery. What was Dr. Hart hiding? And what role did Jennifer play in all of this? As I hung up the phone, I felt the familiar weight of doubt settle over me. The truth was out there, just beyond my grasp, and I wasn't going to stop until I had it. The revelation about Dr. Hart sent me spiraling. I couldn't shake the image of him sitting across from Jennifer, their conversations cloaked in a familiarity I didn't understand. It wasn't just about the secrecy anymore, it was about the connection. What did they share that I wasn't a part of? That evening, as Jennifer cooked dinner, I hovered nearby, watching her every move. Want to help? She asked, glancing over her shoulder with a smile. Sure, I said, picking up a knife to chop vegetables. For a moment, we worked in silence, the kind that used to feel comfortable. Now it felt loaded. Have you been to the doctor recently? I asked casually, keeping my tone light. Jennifer froze for a fraction of a second before resuming her chopping. Not recently, she said. Why? Just wondering. I replied, my heart pounding. She didn't look at me, her focus fixed on the cutting board. After dinner, I excused myself to the garage, pretending to sort through some old tools. Instead, I called Alan. Any progress on Hart? I asked, my voice low. Some, Alan replied. I've been monitoring his movements. Nothing out of the ordinary, but I did notice something strange. He's been visiting a property outside of town, a private cabin. A cabin? I repeated, my brow furrowing. Yeah, I got the address if you want it. The address burned a hole in my mind for the rest of the night. What was Dr. Hart doing at a cabin? And why did it feel like Jennifer was somehow connected? I waited until Jennifer was asleep before pulling up a map and locating the property. It was about an hour away, tucked deep in the woods. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my keys and headed out. The drive was tense, every mile fueling my anxiety. The cabin sat at the end of a winding dirt road, its silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. I parked a safe distance away and approached on foot, my heart pounding in my ears. The cabin was dark, its windows reflecting the faint glow of the moon. There were no cars in the driveway, no sign of anyone inside. I crept closer, peering through one of the windows. The interior was sparse, a single room with a table, a few chairs, and a couch. Papers were scattered across the table, but I couldn't make out the details. Suddenly, a sound behind me made me freeze. Who's there? A voice called out. I turned, my breath catching in my throat as a flashlight beam hit me. It was Dr. Hart. Mark, he said, his voice laced with confusion. What the hell are you doing here? I demanded, my voice sharp. I could ask you the same thing, Hart replied, lowering the flashlight. I know about the meetings, I said, stepping closer. I know you've been meeting Jennifer. What's going on? Hart hesitated, his face unreadable. This isn't the place for this conversation, he said finally. Let's talk somewhere else. No, isnapa. We're talking now. Hart sighed, running a hand through his hair. Fine, but I need you to understand. This isn't what you think. Then explain it, I said, my voice trembling with anger. Hart's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something like guilt. It's about Jennifer's health, he said quietly. It's about Jennifer's health. Dr. Hart's words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. What do you mean her health? I demanded, my voice sharp. Hart hesitated, glancing toward the cabin like he was weighing his options. Finally, he gestured toward the door. Let's go inside. I'll explain. Reluctantly, I followed him into the cabin, my eyes darting to the scattered papers on the table. Hart flipped on a dim lamp, casting a yellow glow over the room. Start talking, I said, crossing my arms. Hart took a deep breath, pulling out a chair and gesturing for me to sit. I stayed standing, my fists clenched at my sides. A few months ago, Jennifer came to me with concerns. He began, his voice calm, but tinged with hesitation. She'd been experiencing some symptoms, fatigue, dizziness, things like that. She didn't want to worry you, so she asked me to keep it confidential while we ran some tests. Tests? I repeated, my stomach churning. Yes, he said, and the results were inconclusive. There was nothing definitive, but enough to raise some red flags. I recommended further monitoring and suggested she see a specialist, but Jennifer refused. She insisted on handling it quietly. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Jennifer hadn't said a word about feeling unwell. Not once. Why would she hide this from me? I asked, my voice cracking. Hart sighed, leaning forward. You'll have to ask her that. All I know is that she was adamant about keeping you out of it. For now, at least. For now, I said, my anger bubbling to the surface. You're telling me she's been keeping secrets about her health, and you just went along with it? She trusted me, Hart said firmly, and I was trying to respect her wishes. I paced the room, my thoughts spiraling. Could this explain the meetings? The coffee shop? The lies? What about the hotel? I asked suddenly, turning to face him. Hart frowned. What hotel? Don't play dumb, I snapped. Jennifer was spotted at a hotel downtown. Alone. Does that have something to do with this? Hart's confusion seemed genuine, but it only fueled my frustration. I don't know anything about a hotel, he said. Whatever that was, it wasn't related to me. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. If Hart was telling the truth, and I wasn't sure he was. It meant Jennifer's secrecy went even deeper than I'd realized. What happens now? I asked, my voice quieter. Hart leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. Now you talk to Jennifer. I've done all I can as her doctor. The rest is up to her. I left the cabin in a daze, Hart's words echoing in my mind. Jennifer had been hiding something from me, something serious. But was it really about her health? And if it wasn't, what was she still keeping from me? When I got home, Jennifer was already asleep, her breathing soft and steady. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her. If Hart was telling the truth, why hadn't she told me? If he wasn't, what else was he hiding? I clenched my fists, a mix of anger and fear twisting in my chest. Whatever the truth was, I was going to find it. The next morning, I woke to find Jennifer already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed. Her phone was in her hand, but she wasn't scrolling or texting. She was staring at it, her expression distant, almost sad. Morning, I said cautiously, sitting up. She startled slightly, as if I'd broken a spell. Morning, she replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. For a moment, I considered launching into the conversation I'd rehearsed in my head all night. But I didn't know where to begin. Over breakfast, the tension was palpable. Jennifer picked at her food, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet unease. You okay? I asked, trying to sound casual. She nodded quickly. Yeah, just tired. Work's been non-stop lately. It was another lie. I could feel it. Jennifer, I said, setting my fork down. We need to talk. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, wide and cautious. About what? About what's really going on? I said, my voice steady. I know you've been meeting with someone. I know you've been hiding things from me. Her face paled, and for a moment I thought she might deny it. But then she sighed, pushing her plate away. You're right, she said quietly. I've been hiding something. My heart pounded as I leaned forward. Why? Because I didn't want to burden you, she said, her voice trembling. I've been dealing with some personal things I wasn't ready to share, like your health. I pressed, watching her closely. Her eyes widened, surprise flickering across her face. Who told you about that? It doesn't matter, I said. What matters is that you didn't tell me. Why? She hesitated, wringing her hands. I didn't want to scare you, she said finally. The symptoms started months ago, and I thought they were nothing, but then they didn't go away, and I didn't know how to handle it. Her voice broke, and she looked away, tears brimming in her eyes. I didn't want you to see me like that, she whispered. Her vulnerability hit me like a punch to the gut. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than suspicion. Empathy. Jennifer, I said gently, reaching for her hand. You don't have to go through this alone. Whatever's happening, we'll face it together. She looked at me, her expression a mix of relief and guilt. I'm sorry, she said, her voice cracking. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I just made things worse. For a brief moment, the tension between us seemed to lift. But as I watched her, a nagging thought crept back in. If her health was the reason for her secrecy, what about the hotel, the coffee shop, the man she'd been meeting? There were still too many unanswered questions, and I wasn't ready to let them go. Later that day, Alan called with another update. I followed Hart again, he said. This time, he met with someone else, an older man, late 50s. They talked for a while, and it looked tense. What did they talk about? I asked. I couldn't hear, but I'll dig into the other guy, Alan said. There's more to this, Mark. I can feel it. As I hung up, I felt the weight of the unfinished puzzle pressing down on me. Jennifer's health was part of the picture, but it wasn't the whole story. And until I had the whole truth, I couldn't let it go. Jennifer's confession about her health sat heavy in my mind, but the unease hadn't gone away. Something still didn't add up. If her symptoms were the reason for her secrecy, why the meetings with Dr. Hart? Why the hotel? The cracks in her explanation were too big to ignore. That evening, Jennifer was unusually quiet, her gaze distant as we ate dinner. I tried to match her silence, but the tension between us was suffocating. You're awfully quiet, I said, breaking the silence. Just tired, she replied, not looking up. Another lie. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my frustration in check. Jennifer, I said, my tone firmer than I intended. If there's something else going on, now's the time to tell me. She froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. What do you mean? You know what I mean? I said, locking eyes with her. She set her fork down, her face unreadable. Mark, I told you the truth about my health. There's nothing else. Then why were you at a hotel last week? I demanded, my voice rising. Her eyes widened, and I saw the flicker of panic she couldn't hide. How do you know about that? She whispered. It doesn't matter, I snapped. What matters is that you've been lying to me again. So tell me the truth, Jennifer. What's going on? She pushed back her chair and stood, pacing the room with her arms crossed. You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me, I said, standing as well. She stopped and turned to face me, her eyes brimming with tears. I can't. The words cut deeper than I expected. You can't, I repeated, my voice thick with anger. Or you won't. Her silence was answer enough. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. By morning, I'd made up my mind. If Jennifer wouldn't give me the truth, I'd find it myself. Alan's call came later that afternoon. I've got something, he said, his tone urgent. What is it? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. It's about Hart, Alan replied. I dug into the man he met at the cabin. Turns out he's a consultant, specializes in legal compliance and damage control. Damage control? I repeated, my stomach sinking. Yeah, Alan said. I think Hart's hiding something bigger than just Jennifer's health. And whatever it is, it's serious enough that he's calling in professionals to cover his tracks. The revelation hit me like a freight train. Hart wasn't just Jennifer's doctor. He was a man with secrets of his own. And somehow, Jennifer was caught in the middle. That evening, as Jennifer sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I watched her carefully. She looked calm, almost serene, but I knew better now. Jen, I said, my voice steady. I need you to be honest with me. Are you in some kind of trouble? She glanced up, frowning. What do you mean? Is Hart blackmailing you? Pressuring you? Anything? I pressed. Her confusion seemed genuine, but I wasn't convinced. Mark, no, she said, setting her phone down. Ethan has been nothing but helpful. He's been trying to figure out what's wrong with me. I studied her, searching for any sign of deception. Then why did you lie about the hotel? About Maya? About everything? Her face fell, and she looked away. I made mistakes, she whispered, but I didn't do anything wrong. Not like you think. Her words only deepened the pit in my stomach. As the night wore on, I felt the walls closing in. The truth was out there, tangled in Jennifer's lies, Hart's secrets, and the threads Alan was unraveling. Tomorrow, I'd confront Hart. In one way or another, I'd get the answers I deserved. The next morning, I called Dr. Hart's office. The receptionist answered with her usual cheer, but my voice was cold and clipped. I need to see Dr. Hart today, I said. He's booked, she replied. The earliest appointment I can. It's urgent, I interrupted. Tell him it's Mark Reynolds, and I'm coming in. The receptionist hesitated, but finally relented. I'll let him know. Come in at 2. By the time I arrived at the office, the air felt electric, every nerve in my body on edge. The waiting room was quiet, the faint smell of antiseptic lingering in the air. Hart's assistant led me back to his office, where he was seated behind his polished desk, his expression carefully neutral. Mark, he said, standing to shake my hand. I didn't take it. Cut the formalities, Hart, I said. I want answers. Now. Hart sighed, gesturing for me to sit. I told you everything I could at the cabin, he said. No. I snapped, leaning over the desk. You told me a half-truth wrapped in medical jargon. I want the whole story. Why you've been meeting Jennifer, why she's lying, and what the hell you're really hiding. For a moment, Hart just looked at me, his calm demeanor slipping. Mark, he said finally, this isn't the place for this conversation. This is the only place for it, I shot back. Hart leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped in front of him. All right, he said. You want the truth? Here it is. He took a deep breath, his voice steady but laced with something I couldn't place. Guilt, maybe, or fear. Jennifer came to me months ago with symptoms she couldn't explain. But as we talked, it became clear that her physical symptoms weren't the real issue. She was under incredible stress. Stress she didn't feel comfortable sharing with you. Stress from what? I demanded. Hart hesitated. From guilt. The word hit me like a punch. Guilt about what? I asked, my voice trembling. Hart's gaze didn't waver. About an affair, he said simply. I froze, the air rushing out of my lungs. An affair? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Hart said. She told me it ended months ago, but the fallout left her struggling. She came to me because she trusted me as her doctor, not because I was involved. My mind reeled. Jennifer had been unfaithful. She'd hidden it, lied about it, and carried the weight of it while pretending everything was fine. And the man she was seeing? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Hart hesitated again, and this time, I saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes. It was me, he admitted quietly. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white. You, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You've been sitting there, playing the role of the trusted doctor, while you were— It ended, Hart interrupted, his voice firm. Months ago. She broke it off because she realized what she was risking. But the guilt ate away at her, and she didn't know how to face you. My vision blurred with anger. You think that justifies what you did? You think that makes it better? No, Hart said, his tone subdued. It doesn't. I made a mistake, one I deeply regret. But Jennifer loves you, Mark. She came to me because she didn't want to lose you. I stood, my hands trembling as I pointed at him. You stay the hell away from my wife, I said, my voice low and dangerous. If I ever see you near her again, I'll make sure you regret it. Hart nodded, his expression grim. Understood. When I left the office, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, heartbreak. Jennifer's lies had finally unraveled, and the truth was uglier than I'd imagined. By the time I got home, I'd made up my mind. Jennifer was sitting on the couch, her face pale as she looked up at me. Mark, she began, her voice trembling. Don't, I said, holding up a hand. I talked to Hart. I know everything. Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered. Sorry isn't enough, I said, my voice hard. You broke us, Jennifer, and I don't know if we can ever come back from this. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had clarity. The lies were over. But at what cost?